welcome back, you guys. Today's video is going to be a good one. I'm excited for this video. I'm excited to actually create this video, and I put a lot of effort into it because it was very difficult for me to do. Today's video is going to be ranking all of my ABH eyeshadow palettes, the ones that I like to the ones that I dislike the most. And this is actually a request from a subscriber of mine. I actually posted a picture on Instagram and somebody had mentioned that you should rank all of your eyeshadow palettes, and I have actually seen these going around for quite some time, people doing different variations of them, whether with eyeshadow palettes or blushes or bronzers and stuff like that. So that is what we're going to do today. I hope that you find this video helpful. So we are going to get diving right into it because I have quite a few palettes to talk about. So starting off with number 11, we have the Subculture Palette. This one here is very, oh my eyelash. I was really excited when this palette came out because there are so many colors in this palette that I just really gravitate towards. There are a lot of colors in here that I just found that could make a great color combination. I did do a full-on review and swatch of this video, and in that video I actually found it to work pretty okay for me. The biggest trigger that I have with this palette is that with time and time that I've used this palette, this is definitely a palette that I have dove into more than once now, and every time I do it, I have to make sure that there are certain color combinations that I can't put together, or that there are certain colors in this palette that just don't mix well with other colors, or there are certain colors in here that I just don't use as well. And for that reason, that is why I dislike this palette, because this is my most finicky palette that I have, and this is the one palette that I probably wouldn't recommend to people. For that reason, I just don't care for it at all. So number 10 is this one right here, which I do believe is called the CATWALK palette. If I'm wrong, I will put it right here. This has been discontinued for quite some time. Even though it's a little bit older, I still do have it in my collection because it still works. My biggest problem with this palette is just the colors are just bland. There's not anything there that's really eye-catching to me. I think when I bought this palette, I think I bought it more for the namesake than anything else. I feel like these colors right here, just when I put them on my lid, they kind of just blend into one color. There's not really a whole lot of definition there. And I do like every once in a while going into a palette and creating the same look that maybe I found really great on my eyes. But when I'm constantly trying to find different looks to do and I can't do it with this, I get kind of frustrated and I just kind of don't ever touch it. So the next one I have is the Artist Palette. Some of these colors in here, like Dusty Rose, Aubergine, Coal, you know, Beigely, which may not be the same name in other palettes, but it's the same color basically. I've seen those colors already in other palettes, and again, that is the reason why I don't dive into it. I don't hate it. There's nothing wrong with the formula in it. It just is a palette that I've got other palettes in my collection, so I always forget about this palette mainly. I may have the unpopular opinion on this palette because I see a lot of people asking for this palette to come back, and this here is the Master Palette by Mario. And I, again, did a full-on review and swatch video, and I have a girlfriend who loves this palette. She thinks it's one of her favorite palettes. She uses it all the time to this day, and she wishes that they would come back with this palette. The formula to this is gorgeous. It is definitely there with all the other eyeshadow formulas that ABH throws out. The colors are beautiful, but I just don't get wowed by this. And the looks I create, when I create them on myself, I just don't find to be super flattering on me, and I just kind of get bored with it. Whew, this is hard. This is such a hard video. This palette here was kind of difficult for me to decide where I wanted to put it because I have like a love-hate relationship with this palette, and it's the PRISM palette. I see people do incredible looks using the PRISM palette, and I always try to recreate those looks, or I try to get inspired to do those looks, and they never come out the way I want them to. A lot of the colors in here are not very similar to any of the colors in some of the other palettes from her collection. I know that Sphere is like the super eye-catching color in this palette, and unfortunately it's like the one palette color in this palette that I just really don't care for because it really muddies on my eyes and it really makes my eyes look very dull, and it just brings out a lot of discoloration, so I hardly ever use it. But the reason that I really care for this palette is the metallics in here more than anything. The mattes in here I could definitely do without because I've seen them, or they're in other palettes again, but this Eternal Sphinx Throne Pyramid, I mean, there's multiple times where I dive into this palette just for these metallics. So it was kind of like that palette that's kind of in the middle, like it's a love-hate relationship with this palette. So I was like, well, I don't hate it, but I don't necessarily like love, love, love it. So that's why it's kind of in the middle. The next one I have is the Shadow Couture, which is the World Traveler palette. And this one here is what it looks like. And this one is, to me, a little similar to another palette that I'm going to show you guys, but I ranked it a little bit higher because I do use that palette way more. I dive into this palette quite often, not as often as some of the other palettes, but before I had some of these newer palettes that I'm going to show you guys, I dove into this quite a bit, mainly for more of the neutral colors. I really rarely ever dive into these. Maybe every once in a while I'll pop it on the lid and stuff, but I always found myself diving into the neutral side, like right over here, and then always into the pink champagne, which is still one of my favorite colors. This one and then another shade is probably my all-time favorite colors from her palette. The next one, which is the Vina palette. Now, this one was another palette that I was really confused as to where I was gonna put it. I don't use it as much as I thought I was going to. For me, I really like it because I love purples. I think purples are so beautiful. I love them on my lid, and I do like pink tones, but I think if you don't really care for purples and pinks, this might be a palette that you really don't dive into as much. I try to stay away from purples as much as I can here on my channel, just because I always dive into purple, because purple is just my favorite color for eyes. Like, I absolutely love it and stuff. So I try to play around with other palettes, but on my off days, if I want to play around with color, I do dive into this palette. There is something about Anastasia metallics, which I've mentioned previously. I really like them, and there's a reason. I don't know what it is, but her formula when it comes to her metallics and her shimmers, just like through the roof, just blown out way above all other brands. Like, I love them so much, and the mattes are really great in here too, but I typically always gravitate towards these kind of metallic shades. For me, I really like this palette, but I ranked it where it did just because it's not going to be something that everybody would really gravitate towards. It's more of a palette that is only going to grab a certain amount of people that have a certain taste for certain colors. Then we move into the next palette. I, to this day, still dive into it, and the reason I didn't put it as one of my more top palettes is because you cannot get this anymore, and I know that people have asked for this palette to come back, and it is the Measly palette by Anastasia. And this palette for me is such a beautiful palette, but keep in mind that even though it is a limited edition palette, the reason I ranked it a little bit higher is because a lot of these colors in here you still can get in some of the other palettes I'm going to show you. The other thing I noticed about this palette, and I don't know if you can get this one still, but what I found was that I felt like there was a little bit of similarities in these two palettes. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I felt like when I saw this, I was like, wow, these a little bit similar, right? Like, there's a little bit of similarity there in these palettes. I find that every time I create a look using this palette, again, I get a lot of compliments on it. I love the way it turns out on my eyes. I love the way it looks. And there are staple eyeshadows from Anastasia, which I understand why they are put in eyeshadow palettes, because they are very popular. They're very, very good and very easy to work with, and those are some of the colors. So moving into our top 3 eyeshadow palettes. So the number 3 eyeshadow palette from Anastasia that I would say is the Sultry palette. I ranked it where it was because of the advancement of it, I guess I should say. A lot of people, in my opinion, don't gravitate towards cool tone colors. I know quite a few people that love cool tone eyeshadow as much as I do, but I still know more people that prefer warm tone colors. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that warm tone colors are a lot easier to work with versus cool tone colors, where, in my opinion, some of these colors look really good together, and then some of these colors look really terrible together. I have done looks using this palette and they look really shitty. And then I've done looks using this palette and they look amazing. And that is just the thing with cool tone colors, is that you have to find the right color combos, and once you do, you can create amazing looks. And again, her formula in this palette is incredible. Some of the metallics in here are not as creamy as, like, let's say the Vina metallics. These are a lot creamier than the sultry ones. The one thing I will say I really, really dislike in this palette is this right here, which is called Bloom, which again is very similar to another eyeshadow we found in here. I think it was in the Prism palette, called Eden. And again, I don't care for that color in this palette, but this color Bloom right here, every time I use it, it looks like I got a pink eye every time, and then it stains my eye. So that is one color that I could definitely have been like, yeah, you could definitely do without. You do not need that color. I know if you love cool tone colors, you would definitely appreciate this palette. So we have last two palettes to go through, and these were the two hardest palettes to decide on. I still am going back and forth because I can't figure out which one I love more, because I love them both equally so much. I know some of you guys are going to be shocked because this is actually my second eyeshadow palette that I have purchased because I've used it that much. And this here is the Modern Renaissance by Anastasia. So for me, when this palette came out, I loved it so much, and I still do, that anytime an eyeshadow palette comes out after this palette, I definitely compare it to this palette, because for me, the eyeshadow palette formula is there, the color combo is there, the scheme is there. Everything about this palette to me just screams perfection. The only reason why I personally dodged it, and this is just for me, is because for me, I wish that there was a color that was slightly darker than Cypress Umber. The biggest complaint that I've had with playing with this palette, now that I've had two of them, is that every time I want to create something really deep and really, really sultry, I have to dive into another palette. Now, for some people, that may not be an issue. Some people don't choose and don't want to have a black eyeshadow in their palettes, but I personally love having that in my palette. That is the only little tweak I have in it, but nonetheless, I mean, it is such a good palette, and it's one of my favorite palettes. Now, like I said, that palette was the bar set for every other eyeshadow palette that's came out. For me, I compare that palette to everything else, and the only one that I have found that has slightly beat it, and that I seem to now gravitate more towards anything I take with me everywhere, I just find this palette to be everything I think I would want in a palette. I think, like I said, if I was to get rid of all of my palettes and only have my three palettes, which was the Modern Renaissance, this palette, and the Sultry, I would be happy. Not saying that's going to happen, but I would say that that is something that if that were to happen, I would still be just as happy with these three palettes. And the number one palette in my collection that I absolutely love from her entire collection is the Soft Glam palette. Everything about this palette I really do love, and I guess maybe because it has every sort of colors that I could want. Obviously, there's some notches in here that I would definitely say, oh, I wish I had this and I wish I had that, but I feel like everybody's going to say something about a palette, you know? I find myself always able to create really great colors in here. I love the mattes in this palette. I love the color combinations that it has, the different shades of brown that you can create. And I think if you like your neutral colors, but you want a little bit more intensity in them, you're gonna find it in this palette. You're gonna be able to play around with this palette. You're gonna be able to create really great daytime work appropriate eyeshadow looks to nighttime, you know, appropriate looks. You're gonna get a really nice color combination. Oh my gosh, I just love this. I love this. This one right here called Bronze is one of my favorite colors to play around with. I honestly think if she was to come out with a quad and it was just these like four right here, I would like all my money. Just throw it all at her, because this is right here. This is my favorite right here, and I do this look combo all the time. All the time. Those there are my top 11 palettes from Anastasia that I would rank in my collection that I love so much. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope I gave you guys a little bit of feedback as to why I love it and I don't love these palettes, and let me know which other brand or what other palettes you'd like to see. Maybe we could do like my drugstore top 10 drugstore eyeshadow palettes that I own in my collection and rank them. I don't know, I'm just throwing out ideas, but you guys let me know down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys all in my next video. If you don't know already, I do upload on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays, and I will see you guys then. Bye.